Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of Hash It Out. Hash It Out is a podcast that we do here at Woodlawn where we like to talk about the passage of the most recent sermon that was preached and really some implications of it, some jump-off points, and other conversation that hopefully is edifying to anybody watching. My name is Justin Moorhead. This is my good buddy, Mitchell Evans, who I just found out was a junior. So Mitch Jr.
Yes.
It's great. Today we're going to talk about Nehemiah 13, which Mitch preached yesterday, and talk about some of the issues there. In short, Nehemiah was really excited about how well things had gone, and so he was going to take a little break and went back to be with the king, and things fell apart. In particular, there were a couple of, sin errors that were recognized among the people, and I think a couple of them will provide a really good opportunity for us to just have further discussion. One of the things has to do with Sabbath. So one of the things that the people were doing wrongly, one of the ways they were sinning, is they weren't honoring the Sabbath. There's a ton of conversation about what does it mean for us as Christians to uphold kind of a Sabbath idea, or even if you think in commandment form, of keeping the Sabbath, this idea. So in general, how we as Christians understand the Sabbath, I think there would be like a ton of stuff to talk about. In short, is this more than just a difference in day of the week? So like the Jewish understanding of the Sabbath, if I get it, was they're going to, on Saturday, refrain from doing anything, had a lot of restrictions on things you couldn't do on Saturday, so they could rest and worship God. So it's like this kind of dual purpose of resting and worshiping God, but they're going to accomplish that by kind of prohibiting any kind of work. So are we just now doing that on Sunday? Is it more than this? Help us understand it, Mitchell.
Yeah, I think there are several aspects of which the understanding of it changed. I would say the purpose of the understanding for Sabbath has remained the same even prior to the days of Israel. You go all the way back to Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden. So God completes his work on 6 days, and then the seventh day he rests from his work. It's a day consecrated or made holy to the Lord. And then really Adam and Eve live in perpetual seventh day. So they have this perpetual occasion of rest and consecration towards the Lord. And so that idea then is interrupted by sin and the fall. And so when you get to the nation of Israel, they're recognizing that, so that the Ten Commandments actually cites the Genesis Adam and Eve passage for the reason for Sabbath. And so you have this idea being brought back, and that they would have a Sabbath rest in Israel's day. So by the time you get to Nehemiah, they're reflecting less on Adam and Eve, God sees from work, and much more on Ten Commandments. You should keep the Sabbath. They do mean, among other things, that you should cease from work.
Yeah.
How you define that is famously tricky. The Pharisees defined it in ways that meant if you're walking through a grain field and Jesus' followers grabbed some wheat and they kind of pulled the kernel out of the husk, that was harvesting, that was a form of work. And so they couldn't even do a handful and pop it into their mouth without being perceived as working. More modern day, the idea is that if you start a fire, you're expressing some type of work. And so a real kind of famous but maybe not helpful example is that you can't push a button in an elevator because that's you igniting a fire when you push the button. So it's like the scene in Elf when Will Ferrell gets in the elevator and just pushes all the buttons, right? And you get a ride to every floor. So that's the idea, is I'm not going to push any buttons, so it'll open up on every floor on the Sabbath. So I'm not going to do any work, cessation of work. There was the idea that you should break from your regular practices.
Yeah.
And focus on, in particular, rest. And I think that's good to hang on to, this idea that it is a break from the practices and rest, but you would rest from those practices in a day that's holy or consecrated, or time slot that's holy or consecrated to the Lord. The New Testament, Romans in particular, says some people count one day as holy unto the Lord. Some count all days as holy unto the Lord. So Paul is saying you should count this idea of time unto the Lord very much in your regular life. But it becomes less about ceasing from all work on a particular day. So some would see it move from Sabbath, Saturday, last day of the week with Judaism to the first day of the week in Christianity, and you should just not work. And that has been historically a very strong understanding of that principle applied. You should not work. So even as recently as like the 1980s, you would have towns that would have laws, blue laws, where they would say no, and some have even persisted into more recent eras. But starting at sundown on Saturday until sundown on Sunday, stores would be closed. You couldn't sell alcohol. You couldn't rent a whole litany of things. You couldn't sell anything but groceries, and then only some drugstores would be open. It would rotate. Restaurants weren't allowed to open because they wanted to keep that Sabbath idea. So we don't have to go too far back, even to Christendom, Christian history, to see a strong expression of it. That's really, really our society now is pretty vacuous of that idea. So I know that was a broad discussion on the ceasing of work tied to a Christian Sabbath.
Yeah, I have a question. I think it's good. If we go all the way back to the kind of grounding biblical scene of Eden, right? So this idea, this perpetual rest. But we do know that before sin entered into the mix, they were going to be taking care of this garden. They would have been cultivating and working. That's where we get the idea, theologically, that work is a good thing. Work is not a result of sin. Yeah. Work is what we've been designed and created to do. So if the pre-sin state in Eden would have been this kind of perpetual Sabbath, it would have included work. So then my question would be, to what extent does that impact the way we view rest in the way that God views rest? And why, so then with that kind of clarification on the rest that God might have in mind, why does God care about rest so much for us?
Yeah, I think it's good comment. Maybe the easiest, quickest answer is that's precisely what Jesus points to. Because they were saying, God rested on the Sabbath, and Jesus says, well, no, my Father works. He's working even to today, and he's speaking on the Sabbath. So it is not a ceasing of all work. It was the creative work had finished, and then you certainly have a sustaining work that goes on from the hand of God on every day of every week in perpetuity. So that idea that it's the ceasing of work is missing it. What I think the New Testament is getting to, and it's saying, Paul says, some esteem all days the same, is that you can rest even in your work. So the concept, not to cloud it too much, but the concept is, am I working to earn something? Or can I rest from that? I no longer have to earn my good standing. I no longer have to earn my right position before God. Yeah. I can rest from that. So Christ has provided rest in those ways. So the writer of Hebrews, chapter 3 and 4, points it out in that direction. And I would say that's probably the most helpful piece for Christians now. Yeah. Is if I embrace grace, the concept of grace, the opposite of grace is work or earn. So I'm either given something freely or I've earned it. So if I think I need to earn the good life, the best life, the way I'm going to get my possible best life is if I produce it. The Christian says Christ produced it for me, and I'm receiving that as grace. The way that I would express that and maybe demonstrate my awareness of that is I can take time out of my life consecrated for God, set aside for God, and I don't have to do something I don't have to do another household chore. I don't have to do another leisure activity because that'll give me the good life, right? The pickleball, the golf, the whatever. Sure. I can have time just totally set aside for my relationship with God, and I can have that in such a way that it's very restful. And so it's not sleep. Sure. Right? But it's consecrated for God. It's a restful experience. I would say the person that can't do that if they try to set aside a time with God, and the whole time all they're thinking is, I can't wait till this is over. So I can get back to what would really be enjoyable, really needs to be done, really needs to check off my list, whatever the case may be. they are not really embracing grace if they can't set aside that time. They don't really have that understanding of grace deep enough to do it, because what they are still convinced of is, if I could get out there and do this other thing, that will make my life better. Sitting here, just kind of existing, isn't doing anything for me.
Sure.
And so I think that concept, it's not just Christians today. Amos chapter 8, verse 5, they say we can't wait till the holiday is over, or the Sabbath is over, so that we can get back to work. We can get back to a thing that's really means something to us. So I would say for a Christian who wants to appreciate grace, would follow Nehemiah, really.
Yeah.
Nehemiah, they did not hold the Sabbath idea well.
Right.
So he says we need to close the city gates on the Sabbath. So it kind of forces us towards rest. What I love is the people who were trying to sell goods on the Sabbath went right outside the city gates. And so they're out there, and he says, if you do this again, I'm going to come thump you. I'm going to come lay hands on you. I'm going to come, provide a beat down. Right?
Sure.
Too bad old Chuck Norris is gone. He would have been instrumental in that moment. So he's saying, and if I could rephrase it, he says, I'm going to put barriers up that will protect this time. So I say it's a very good Christian idea. I'm going to set aside time. I'm going to put barriers up that protect this time.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to grow in it. So probably the first time you set aside, even if it's Sunday morning, and you get really determined to set that aside, and there's some opportunity that looks great.
Yeah.
And you think, man, that would be a lot of fun. What's one Sunday away?
Sure.
Let's get out on the lake or whatever. And I think that would be better if I set the barriers up and say, no, I'm going to hold the barriers.
Sure.
I think your first experience will be that kind of longing to get back out there. And so it is something you'll have to grow in and say, I need to learn to appreciate this. My best version of my life has been earned for me. And so I need to sit with that for a little bit. I think it's the helpful practice of embracing the grace and then seeing the expression of that in rest. So that was me, a lot of talking. Hopefully some of it made sense.
I know. I think that it's helpful to talk a lot about it, because I have found that how a Christian understands the Sabbath is misunderstood most of the time. It's either an overly Jewish understanding, or it kind of throws everything out the water and it becomes its own thing. So I think to see that the principle has not really changed. It's the idea that you need to set aside time so that you can rightly worship God and rest. I think to see that has not changed at all. I think how Christ has made grace much more apparent certainly informs the way a Christian would want to pursue life in a Sabbath type of a way, even to have expressions on a daily basis, certainly on the Lord's Day, not to neglect the assembling of yourselves together, is a guardrail that the Bible gives us to say, okay, you need to at least be setting this aside, this time of corporate worship. But while you were talking, I was even thinking about in my daily kind of devotional practice, what I want to uphold for myself and my relationship with God in time in God's Word and prayer and things like that. There are times where that Amos idea creeps into my mind and you just want to get on with it. So then it becomes this box that you're checking. I got to finish reading this thing so that I can get on. But you're doing it all with another thing in mind is very convicting. So I think that, hopefully talking it through really helps us to understand a principle from God that He's wanted for His people from Eden until now. It is a good thing to talk a lot about. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really tough for us. We're very entertainment driven. I'm very entertainment driven. I mean, and I live amongst the entertainment driven people. So to say I'm going to set aside time for God, and it's not going to involve my phone, when you end up on vacation or you end up somewhere where you don't get service, you get like zero service, or you're maybe it's in an airplane for a minute and you got to put it on airplane mode or whatever else, and then just to sit there and to realize I have grown so uncomfortable with this. So I think there's some really practical pieces of it that would be immediately challenging, but they're worth pushing through. So setting the phone aside. while you're in church on
Yeah.
Sunday morning, setting your phone aside for the time. I think other pieces of it that are equally as challenging as what I have found is if I set aside time for the Lord, what then happens is it gets quiet for a moment, and what floods my thoughts is all the things I need to do.
Yeah.
So I think if you say, okay, I'm going to set the phone aside, but I'm going to keep a little sheet of paper here and a pen. And so when the cable bill pops in my head and I think, oh, I got to pay for our internet, I got to pay for our internet, I can write that down and say, okay, I'm going to do it. If I don't do that, I'm kind of slapping myself around saying, man, come on, focus. You're supposed to be resting.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Don't think about those things. So it does give me, so I think some real practical outlets for some of that stuff can be helpful. Put the phone away. It is intended to be a time of worship in particular. So in Revelation, you have the worship of God, and it's juxtaposed with the worship of the beast.
Right.
And the beast is representative in many respects of the world that we are in and being enslaved to this world. What's really interesting is in chapter 14, it says that the believers will worship God.
Right.
Those who do not believe will worship the beast, and they will worship the beast without rest. Let me see if I can spot this for us quick enough. So Revelation 14 is the passage starts really in verse 6 and following, talking about worship. So verse 7, he's talking to those who would worship God, and he says, and he said with a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of water. So we're worshiping the Creator. So that's the believer side of it. Then we get on down, and this is where I'll have to do some quick scanning.
Verse 11.
Is it 11, man? Yes. And the smoke of the torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest, day or night, these worshipers of the beast and its image, and whoever received the mark of its name. So they are stuck in this enslaved, I've got to get on to the next thing.
Yeah.
I can't set a moment aside, or I won't have an hour occasion, the best version of my life. I can't even set a second aside. So really, I'm worshiping something.
Yeah.
And it is never going to allow me to rest. So I think what we're seeing is this glimpse into a heavenly abode in which these things are being lived out in the future. You might say our future, but they're indicative of life now.
Yeah.
I think the need for rest, even if you have to learn to embrace it, and especially with the occasion of I'm going to worship in that.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's very helpful. That's very good. I have one last thing. We'll be brief with this one. One of the other issues that was going on in Nehemiah's day is that folks, while he was away, decided to start marrying outside of the faith and different cultures. They didn't know the language. They ended up with kids who didn't know the language of Judah, I think is what it says. And so then the faith is lost, or it's on the way to being lost among another generation. This makes Nehemiah very upset. Now, in our context, the idea of kind of marrying across cultures and language being lost is less of an issue. There's a lot of great translations of things like the Bible. But for the church, I think that the idea that we should be really concerned about preserving the faith for a future generation is important. That should be something that we take very seriously and have a really keen eye toward. So 2 questions in that regard. Within the church today, modern kind of church expression, what are the biggest threats to generational loss of the faith, and what are best practices to try to preserve it?
Yeah, I think the biggest threat is, I think the number one threat probably, if I could say it first in the opposite vantage point, I'll talk to some people on occasion. They'll say, man, when I was growing up, my parents had me in church every time the door opened. They say it as a critique.
Sure.
I think that idea that is legalistic or unhelpful,
Right.
having your kids at church every time the doors are open, seems, from my vantage point, to lead to what we're experiencing with college students. 9 out of 10 college students leave the church. Some would say it's 8 out of 10. So 80 to 90% leave the church in their college years. What the calculation I've seen is what they were told as a kid is like the travel team is more important, studying for this exam is more important, right? So they're whatever else it might be, sleeping in is more important. We had a long Saturday.
Right.
They get to college, now they're trying to make those calculations for themselves. So if they're thinking, well, if my 12-year-old baseball team was more important,
Sure.
what I'm doing in college must be way more important. So I think that that's an initial piece to it. And then secondly, real practically, if my engagement with church is minimal and that really is just kind of like the moral grounding or whatever else somebody may get, once they're out on their own and they leave the faith would kind of make sense. So I would say being practitioners is going to be the biggest piece to that. And so I think you said it'd be short, so I'll leave it alone. I think there's a whole bunch of ways you should be giving the faith to the next generation. Do you have an additional thought?
No, I think that the idea of keeping it ever before them, so like the idea that, similar to what you said, that being in church every time the doors are open is something to be critiqued, or it always has to go back to the Bible, being something that's critiqued, rather than, no, that is what it's supposed to be, is it's always before our kids all the time. Deuteronomy 6, you talk about it all the time. It's in the house, it's up around the house. So I think that idea is the very logically the best way to preserve it, is to just keep it before them, rather than make it seem like there are some things that trump it. To the examples you gave, I think are great. Travel sports, or I need to rest, or it's a rainy day, or whatever it might be. There are some things that aren't trumped, and that they're always going to be the priority.
Yeah, and kids can see through it.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, if you're faking it.
They know you're faking it.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, that's good. All right, well, hopefully this was helpful to you all. It was a pleasure to sit and talk about this. Hopefully the Sabbath discussion was clarifying this latter portion about how to preserve the faith for a later generation. Hopefully we can apply some of these things well. But we hope that you will tune in next time for another episode of Hash It Out.